All right, cool. So Matt and I just got back from Puerto Rico. We were there last weekend, and there's some really interesting things going on in Puerto Rico right now. So about 5 years ago, I think it was in 2012, they passed these two acts called Act 20 and Act 22, and like people just call it Act 2022, which basically turns Puerto Rico, which is this island nation off the southeast coast of Florida, into the single best tax haven ever created.
For Americans.
Yeah, for Americans.
Yeah.
And it's actually in the Naomi Klein book that we're going to talk about. She uses a line that I really like, which is basically Puerto Rico just dropped the greatest DJ set of all time and then dropped the mic in terms of being a tax haven, and all the other tax havens might as well just leave the building and not even try their set at this point. So what this act does is it installs like a 4% corporate tax rate. So anyone that has a business in Puerto Rico only pays 4% of their corporate taxes, 4% corporate tax rate. It makes it so that any capital gains taxes in Puerto Rico are 0%. So they're taxed at long-term capital gains in the U.S. are 15%. Short-term capital gains are taxed as regular income, 0% in Puerto Rico. There's zero taxes on dividends and things like that. And just there's all this kind of legislation that makes it an awesome tax haven. And because of this, a lot of people, especially in the cryptocurrency space, that have made fortunes over the last, 18 months are moving to Puerto Rico because they don't have to pay any of the capital gains that they've earned on the, appreciation of Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it's kind of creating this interesting little ecosystem that we went down to explore on our own.
Yep, to investigate firsthand. So one of the things that struck me about it, though, was that I also recently learned that part of the new tax code creates opportunity zones in different cities. So one of them is Bushwick, but they also exist in cities like Detroit and so on, in certain neighborhoods, where if you take your capital gains and invest it in property, you also pay 0% tax on that if you leave it in for 10 years. And then it resonated with me when I was thinking about something that you said when we were in this cigar shop down there, because everyone's just smoking cigars there all the time. And you were saying, yeah, it's not like they don't have cigar stores in New York. And I was like, yeah, okay, true. So I didn't buy them down there. And then I found out that there's a cigar shop just a few blocks away from where I live, which had exactly the same cigars that I was buying in Puerto Rico. And I was thinking to myself, wow, San Juan doesn't have shit on New York. So it's like, it doesn't have shit on cigars, and it doesn't have shit on investing with no tax on capital gains. So it's like...
That's true. Yeah, you can invest in property in, I guess, Bushwick and not have to pay property tax on it, which is pretty dope. But the other thing about San Juan, or in Puerto Rico in general, that's really interesting, and I guess we'll dive into it, is that it's a really short flight from New York City or anywhere on the East Coast. Man, that flight is really easy. And just having that tax haven like right off the coast is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I thought Naomi Klein put it well when she said that you have to spend, I think, 180 days there a year, which is 6 months. And then she just says, yeah, so winter for people who live in New York. And I was just like, yes. And so like one of the leitmotifs of that book for me is that she posits all of these developments in terms of like, isn't this so terrible? But so it's hilarious because all of my friends have been pitching it to me always as, isn't this so awesome and great? And so she and I just have such different perspectives on the way the world is and what is good and what's bad.
Yeah. So we should say that this book that we read by Naomi Klein is called The Battle for Paradise. And she's kind of like a liberal activist type that is trying to pitch that this colonization, as she calls it, or no, she uses the term disaster capitalism, which I really like, which is about all the people that are coming to Puerto Rico as a tax haven to invest, and why it's like a negative thing. But we both interpreted the book as it's not necessarily negative, which is kind of interesting. It's also interesting. Okay, so the history of Puerto Rico is kind of interesting because it was kind of discovered by the Spanish as part of like this whole Columbus discovering the New World thing, and then just like straight genocided like everyone living there. So it was like kind of a blank slate for the Spanish to colonize, and it became a Spanish territory up until the Spanish-American War, which is like one of my favorite points in American history, because this is when America was like had these massive debates about, okay, we're kind of badass. We've been, developing for a while. Like all the badass countries have colonies. Like, shouldn't we have colonies? And they're kind of having this internal debate about whether they're going to be imperialistic or not. And kind of these like bros that are running the show, like Teddy Roosevelt and his ilk, are just like, yo, let's just go conquer all these Caribbean islands. Let's just do it.
I also liked what you were saying that time about how it was kind of a reconciliation too. So like right after the Civil War, there was maybe a bit of bad blood between the North and the South, and then we're
Yeah.
getting together like, okay, let's just, resolve our differences and go kick the shit out of Spain. And everyone was like, yeah, let's do it.
So even, I guess, who's the president at the time? Like McKinley or something? Is like, you guys should definitely not just get into boats. Like my administration and generals should not just get into boats and just go conquer all these islands in the Caribbean. But they just did it anyway. You couldn't stop them. And they like went into Cuba and like just killed a bunch of Spanish people. And I guess I didn't even realize this until we were there and I was looking it up, but we took over Puerto Rico in the Spanish-American War also. That was like just another, like, 'cause I guess Cuba was the main front of this, but they also decided we're just going to kick the Spanish out of Puerto Rico also. So they kicked them out of Puerto Rico, made it a colony of the U.S. And then I guess after World War II, it becomes interesting because that's when it's like formalized.
Yeah, and that's when Rum Diary starts, right? So from the book, they were saying that, okay, so Rum Diaries is like this book where Hunter S Thompson, known popularly as that crazy drug addict in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, goes down there as a journalist at the time when the island is first becoming like a tourist destination, and just talking about all the opportunity that people saw for investing there and for developing this island as some kind of holiday paradise, which is like the kind of a similar transformation that people see it undergoing today too.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I guess there was this kind of era after World War II when people legitimately thought the world was going to end because, we'd just been launching all these nuclear bomb tests, and the ideological differences between the U.S. and the Soviet Union were so extreme that like it really seemed like people were willing to blow up the world over it. And there was this kind of I guess essence, and you get this from reading the Hunter S Thompson novel, that people just wanted to live out their last days in peace. They're like, all right, these crazy people that are going to destroy the world, that's just their business. And we're going to go to this island nation that's technically a U.S. territory. So you don't need a passport. You don't need anything like that. You can just go down there, live on the beach, and just live in peace. And that's what a lot of people did. So there was this kind of like vibe there of, like ignoring the rest of the world and just creating your own like little hub there. And and it involved a lot of drugs and just partying and whatever.
Yeah, like it somehow, something that stuck out to me in that Rum Diaries book was the scene where they go into a bar and act like complete assholes and refuse to pay the bill, and then the bar owner calls the cops on them, and like the cops come and beat them up and so on, and they're mad at them for being arrogant Yankees and like coming to Puerto Rico and disrespecting all their laws or whatever. And it made me think about the time that I was living in Singapore and also in Hong Kong, because it's weird to be in this situation of, so it's, maybe I should explain, like both of those places were these colonial outposts of the British Empire and still have this kind of feel to them, sort of. There's like special clubs that were like part of like British society or whatever that like locals weren't discouraged from going into and stuff like this. And it just creates this really weird ecosystem when you're living in such a place as a foreigner. And
it's kind of interesting. I didn't know this either till I looked it up, but Puerto Rico is 75% white, or like in the latest census of Puerto Rico, like 75% of people identified as white, meaning that they like identify with their European heritage more so than their like.
Oh, but it's always interesting to me, like on these censi, on these senseis, that they have this distinction between like non-Hispanic white and Hispanic white or something like this.
Yeah, because I didn't think people were white there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess let's talk a little bit about Puerto Rico, just our experience there. So, okay, first off, everyone there speaks perfect English and Spanish. I did not realize that this was the case. I thought.
But what about our waitress in the first place? Her English was pretty bad.
Oh, really? All right.
Remember, like with the fish tacos?
Oh, yeah. That's true. So, okay, so yeah, there's definitely some, like, you need Spanish, but, like, the people that spoke English spoke it, like, perfectly, like, better than me, honestly, which is, that was pretty cool. Man, there's, like, the car situation there is, that's really incredible. Like, there's just cars from everywhere. It makes no sense. There's no, like, uniformity or rhyme or reason. It's just, like, whatever vehicle you could get your hands on, kind of.
Yeah, like especially you pointed it out when we were down there, and I also started to observe it, that they have a lot of cars that you never see in the U.S., like Fiats and like Alfa Romeos and like weird Chinese cars and stuff like this.
Pretty interesting. So we first visited one of our friends who was staying in Old San Juan, which is like this. I don't know how to describe it. It's kind of the iconic region, I guess, with like all those painted buildings that when you think of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I'm actually there right now.
Matt's
so,
actually, if you're watching the video, you will notice that Matt's actually in Old San Juan right now.
That's correct.
And that's a super interesting area. It's kind of like the party area where you know they have all these bars and like it was very fun to hang out there. We went to the factory. Was it like La Factoria? Man, like everyone does a lot of drugs there. That's something that I noticed.
Our friend also told us that it's the oldest established city in all of the Americas. It's from like the 15 something. I don't know. Maybe a lot of places claim this.
No, I mean, if it's in the 1500s, that would definitely win.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Could be.
So yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's got a lot of cool architecture too, like Rococo and like Baroque architecture everywhere with kind of busts of people holding up doorway arches and like with cobblestone streets, which are very small just for walking. And it's got a very cool vibe.
Yeah. Oh my God. The ceilings are really tall everywhere also, which I'm really into because I believe that if you want to have a big idea, you need a big space to be in.
It's true.
So like you can't have
big ideas.
Yeah, you can't have big ideas with small ceilings. It just doesn't work. That's why most big ideas happen outdoors, and that's a real thing. And if you think about your life, you'll realize that I'm right about it. But yeah, big ceilings everywhere, which is dope. The architecture, the houses are really cheap. Like we were looking at a housing catalog when we were there, and like our friend was thinking about buying a house that cost $4,500. So it's like that's $4,500 for a house. Like why not, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. And then we went over to like El Dorado or Dorado Beach, which is another area which like where the super rich people live. That's interesting also. And I don't know, like this kind of I'm very conflicted about whether to be jaded about the whole Crypto Rico thing, because like part of me is like, man, this is some straight luxury that people are living in, and they're literally just dodging taxes, going to Puerto Rico and having these dope beachfront properties on private beaches, which is also in the Rum Diary. Like it's like he like if you watch so I guess I should say the Rum Diary is a novel by Hunter S Thompson that's like a fictionalized account that's based on his life, which I also think is really interesting, and I'll talk about my thoughts on Hunter S Thompson. But what I was saying is one of the characters has like a private beach, but like that's totally a thing, is that all these like rich Americans come and just like wall off the private beaches that they want and like don't let the people that live there like full time.
But the thing that's so interesting to me is that like you can just see that this is just like a theme that just goes on and on. It's just like something that happens in like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, like since the 60s. It has nothing to do with cryptocurrency.
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
if the wealth was in the .com boom, the cryptocurrency, real estate or whatever, it just is a theme that goes on and on and on.
And like there's always going to be Naomi Klein complaining that like somebody's having more fun than her or whatever. So it's like
yeah, that's true.
It's like sour grapes.
Yeah, and I don't know. So the other question is whether or not so like our friend was saying that the Act 2022, they keep stats on it in the government, and that there's only a couple hundred people a year that take advantage of this. So the actual effect, it gets a lot of media attention, but the actual effect has been quite small, because it's only like 1,000 people maybe total in the entire lifetime of this bill. It's hard for me to know whether the effect is positive or negative. But I guess it goes back to like what you were saying last time we were talking, that like it's just kind of a dead end to even consider that. It's just like a thing that's happening that you should interpret, and like whether or not it's good or bad, you don't know. Yeah,
so it reminds me a lot of I read a book on the crash of 29 about the Great Depression in the United States, and they were talking about Florida as the American Riviera, and they were saying like part of the Great Depression was like people investing in, I don't know, like municipal bonds from Florida, something like this, that were like super overvalued. But then that was also part of the financial crisis in 2008, right? And like people investing in like houses that were worthless in Florida. And then this is also part of like, and so I feel like we're super overdue for a financial crisis, because the last one was in 2008, and like we have them cyclically. So like they happen every 10 years about. So we're like, yeah, it's 10 years since the last one. Maybe another one is like coming. And so maybe it's like, I don't know. I haven't checked up on real estate prices in Florida, but maybe Puerto Rico and Florida are like pretty similar, right? They're like,
yeah, it might be.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So I guess let's talk about the Rum Diary, because technically it's a book podcast. So Rum Diary is a novel by Hunter S Thompson, and it's super interesting, right? Like, so Hunter S Thompson has only written a couple like full-fledged books, I think, and he's most famous for writing Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is the Rum Diary is kind of in a sense like him testing out the techniques that he would use in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, because Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is very much this similar story where it's like kind of a true story, but it just like is a fictionalized account of a true story, where he's just talking about his different adventures and interpretations of people. And the way that he writes is just so, man, it's like so gangbusters into like literally from his eyes to the paper, in the sense that it's like it hasn't been processed at all. It's just very, very raw. Where it's like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. And like, that's just what shows up on the piece of paper.
Yeah, it's interesting that they kind of coined the term gonzo to describe his writing style.
Yes, and I love this because I've also heard people describe my writing style as this, and I think that it's actually kind of accurate.
It's also, so I don't know this from my own personal experience, but somebody told me that a certain style of pornography videos is also called gonzo style. But I don't know what that has to do with Hunter S Thompson.
Interesting. That's a fascinating point, Matthew. So I actually, okay, so the idea behind his writing style is that, and there's a quote by William Faulkner that I really like, which is that the best fiction is more truthful than, most journalism, which is kind of like, and the idea is that, so I guess, okay, so starts in the Rum Diary, right? So, okay, there's another thing that's interesting about this book is that Hunter S. Thompson wrote it. He wrote a bunch of novels before he was famous. He became famous from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but he wrote a lot of stuff before that never really got published. So this book was unpublished until like 1998, which was right before he was dead almost. And then they published it because they're like, oh, you're really famous, and we just looked at all these books that you had written previously, and we should totally publish them because they're interesting, maybe not on their own, but in the context of what you would later do, they become interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and they made a movie of it with Johnny Depp, which is also really interesting that I learned reading this book, was that Hunter S. Thompson met Johnny Depp in real life and became friends with him. And only because he met Johnny Depp in real life did he allow them to make a Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas movie where Johnny Depp was cast as the main character. Cool. So I guess they made this Rum Diary movie after Hunter S. Thompson already died. So he like killed himself. He like shot himself with a shotgun like a couple years before they made this movie. But after he was already dead, Johnny Depp decided to like make this movie as a tribute, I guess. So they actually made a movie and it's really good. It like captures the vibe of San Juan, I would say.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of cool shots from San Juan, and it's just like, what's the streets look like? What does the beach look like? A lot of hats, cigar smoking, drinking rum. It's a good movie. Yeah,
it is, and you get the essence of it, and that's kind of what my interpretation of Rum Diary is that this is really just. It's not like it doesn't stand alone as a work, but it really does. You do get a sense of Hunter S. Thompson's style and like him experimenting with different techniques that then manifest themselves later. So in my opinion, I never actually read Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I've seen the movie, but I read the book that he wrote after Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72.
Which is an awesome, awesome book.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece in my opinion. And it's like that's his real masterpiece. I think Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas gets a lot of attention because of the movie.
Yeah, because like there's a cool movie about it, but I totally agree. And then you can also see that Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 is a masterpiece because, well, I mean, one reason that I think it's a masterpiece is that Matt Taibbi, who I think is a really great journalist, who also in a similar way, so Hunter S. Thompson for a long time was a journalist from Rolling Stone, and Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72, he's writing for Rolling Stone, which I guess used to be a lot edgier before there was like internet, and so you needed like a really like cutting edge publication. And so he was just like following around the presidential campaign and like writing about it in this like edgy and kind of like sardonic style. And then Matt Taibbi is like, who also wrote a book about doing drugs. He like moved to Russia when the Soviet Union was collapsing and like got addicted to heroin and wrote a book about doing heroin. And like his dad is a famous news anchor or something. And then he also wrote a book called Insane Clown President about following around the Republican primaries and stuff like of Donald Trump's election, which was just phenomenally good. And the main thesis from that book was that Donald Trump won the election because U.S. politics are actually a reality TV show, and Donald Trump is the only one who had reality TV show experience, which is like maybe not totally true, but definitely partly true in my opinion.
Oh, I would say it's beyond true. It's almost like common sense.
Yeah. Yeah. But Peter Thiel also has some really good insights about why Donald Trump won, which I think are equally valid. Oh, but then, so this also made me think of when I was talking about how Rolling Stone used to be edgier before there was like the blogosphere, that Hunter S. Thompson did in the Rum Diaries, like basically what the equivalent of modern bloggers do, except in like a million times cooler way. Just like going and writing for like some random English language newspaper in San Juan is such a cool like thing to do. Whereas like if you're writing for a blog, that's just kind of lame. And you probably live in your mom's basement or something like this. I mean,
Yeah.
like not all the time, but like
Yeah, it's like why
that's
not
like the
go
common
to San
conception of
Juan
this.
and experience like something very interesting as opposed to just like living in the city just orthogonally to like how the city's actually being lived in.
Yeah. Or like just the fact that this kind of breed of jobs is extinct. That like travel writer, like, because now with internet and so on, it's just like totally redundant. You don't need, like, if there was a dude that was doing exactly what he was doing then, now, like living in San Juan, getting drunk all the time, going to crazy parties and like writing about it, I would never read that. Like,
Yeah.
you know?
Although, okay, so this is something that I wanted to say that I think is really interesting that ties into that because I think it's very much not dead. And I'll give you my theory on why. But so Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 is such an interesting book, right? Because Hunter S. Thompson is like this rare specimen that is kind of a complete degenerate in the sense that he, you know, does a lot of drugs and is super self-destructive. They'll eventually like, lead him to kill himself. And, you know, like he literally like will just go like hitchhike through Northeast DC with like homeless people to just like ask them about the election, which is like amazing that there's like a political writer doing this, right? Because like none of these people writing about mainstream politics for Politico have ever hitchhiked with a guy in Northeast DC and asked them about the election, you know, like but he also was working for Rolling Stone and like literally interviewing the candidates. So he'd go to dinner like with the candidates and go to dinner with like the most elite politicians. So he had like this kind of like 1 foot in degeneracy of this like underbelly of Washington DC and 1 foot in like the high class Washington DC. And that allowed him to have a perspective to like actually make connections between things and understand the reality of the situation probably better than most people would. And that's why I really like his writing. And I like writing from people. I think this might even be like about America specifically, because in America, like in Europe, you have a lot of equality. Like everyone I know from like Croatia, for example, has a very similar story and they're kind of similar as people. But in America, there's just such, you know, gaps between realities that people live in that like you almost have to be this kind of person to like accurately write anything about America, which is why I like reading American authors that are like this. But anyway, his big thing was that he hated Richard Nixon. And the reason was because he was a fucking complete liar and like politician douchebag when this guy, Hunter S. Thompson, like a really real dude, right? Like this guy.
Yeah, but there was that scene in Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72 when they like took a bus ride together and like talked about football the whole time.
Yeah.
Because apparently Hunter S. Thompson loved football.
Yeah, he wrote for ESPN. I mean, like cool. he was a big sports guy. But anyway, like he hated him as like a personality because of this. And his like whole thing was that he believed one of the problems with what you'd call journalism, and I say that because like I think the what we interpret as journalism is like probably not like the entire conversation around journalism has changed so significantly since like the 70s. But he saw the problem as this idea of like being objective, which is like people had to give credence to both sides. So they can never just accurately say like, Richard Nixon, you're a fucking liar. Like what, like stop saying these things that are not true to the people. Like this is not how news would treat Richard Nixon. They would treat it like, all right, well, that's Richard Nixon's perspective. Let's hear the counter perspective, right? And like very much so, this is kind of inverted in our like modern society where it's like, I think like people that do political media now have gone way too far in the opposite direction where they say, okay, well, you cannot be objective about Trump. So let's just be completely partisan against him and like complete hacks to the point where like it's like you're overcompensating in a way where what you're saying is still irrelevant because it's just overcompensated partisan stuff. It's not like the idea that you can't be objective about Trump and therefore must disagree with everything he says or like hate everything he says or be like generally awful and non-accurate about the world is like overcompensation in the wrong direction. So like the kinds of people that are going to be able to like talk accurately about politics now are like the kinds of people that are like Hunter S. Thompson that, you know, like have like they're not tied to any ideological position. They haven't staked out anything in the ground. They're just a person that is like living in the world and describing it. And that's why I think like you listen to like people like Joe Rogan on their podcasts, they do a really good job of talking about politics in a way that models the reality that you see.
Interesting.
Because they're just like they're not like ingrained in any position. They're just kind of like living in the world and talking about it. And that's what I think Hunter S. Thompson like was so good at. And that's what like I think I've incidentally tried to model, like not intentionally, but just like through my like adventures in Silicon Valley or whatever. Like it just channeling that of like I'm just living and experiencing things and talking about them, but like I'm not like staked in any ideological position.
I think part of it also has to do with outsiderism. So like when you are living in a foreign country, and for all intents and purposes, Puerto Rico is kind of like living in a foreign country. I mean, like it doesn't feel like America when you're there. And so when you live in such a place, then like you can have this kind of detached perspective of like the goings on in some like mother country or whatever, you know, and like kind of view them with a much cooler head. Whereas like if you're actually in it and you have people talking to you like so passionately about it all the time, you know, like then you kind of get a biased perspective from like the people you know and blah blah blah. But like
you get emotional.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like this idea that I heard from Peter Thiel recently, which was that, well, not personally, I watched it on a video, but he was saying that what people often do in the news today is create like a straw man, like a fictitious straw man of their opponent's argument, which is like its weakest possible version. And that if you actually want to come to correct conclusions, you should try and make a steel man
Sure.
of the other person's argument and like try and look at it from its strongest perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's just a common thing. And I think you see this all the time with like, because like tools like Twitter have been like ported to be communication tools, and no one ever like, it just kind of like organically happened. No one intentionally did it. And like, therefore like nobody teaches you how to use them properly. And because of that, there's everyone using these new communication tools, and no one's actually like informed about like the right way to use it, or it's not thoughtful. And the natural way of communication on Twitter is to create a straw man, because you only have small characters and you want to, you know, say something smart. So like, how can you be smart if the delta between what you're saying and what you're arguing against is high, and the easiest way to do that is just like to artificially make the thing bad, you know? So like, it's just like social media leads to natural straw man creation, whereas like long form podcasting like this leads to like natural steel man creation, because you actually have to like hammer out issues and things. And I see the trend moving towards more of the kind of stuff that we're doing, which is like more people reading books, more people listening to long form audio content. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that affects the world, because I think we had this like brief like period where like these social media platforms were like anarchy. Like Twitter is like, you know, Somalia or something, where it's just like this like complete anarchy. And then like random people getting shot in the street just because like someone gave that warlord money or whatever. Like, it's just like complete anarchy. And I think like you'll evolve like more advanced systems for doing social media. So like, it's just kind of this brief period that we're in. But yeah, I think reading Hunter S Thompson is probably the best kind of perspective you can get into like how people should be talking about politics now. And that's kind of like I guess it's maybe not so well articulated by me, but that's kind of the way I think about it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in what you said about why you don't think that like blogging is like dead, or why you don't think that like what Hunter S Thompson
the Gonzo journalism. Well, okay, so first off, I think it's very foreign. Like no one really does it, right? So like most of what you'd call journal, like I guess it's okay. So like I think that what we think of as journalism is really like two things. Like one is journalism, and one is like just like media kind of, or like it's not really journalism, right? Because like journalism is when you don't have I guess the narrative is not pre-written. That's really what I'm trying to get at, is like a lot of modern media, the narrative is pre-written, and you're just like, you know, the narrative you want to tell, and then you just figure out how to tell it. Whereas like what I consider journalism is you don't know what the narrative is. You're just exploring a topic, and then you accurately say whatever you find. And I think that modern media, most of it has moved towards the narrative's already pre-written, and therefore it is useless, because if you're like, I know what CNN is going to say about Donald Trump. Like, I just know. Like, I don't need to watch it. You know, like, you know what it's going to be. Like, that's non-interesting, you know?
And you know what Fox News will say about Donald Trump.
Right. Or, like, yeah, exactly. I mean, Fox News is a little different. I think Fox News is a little better than CNN right now, because I think it's the opposite, right? Like, when Obama was president, Fox News was really bad.
Yeah.
Because everything they said was anti-Obama, and, like, CNN was, like, kind of accurate.
Interesting.
But, like, now with Trump as president, it's like Fox News is, like, slightly more accurate, because they're, like, ideologically conflicted, whereas CNN's vehemently opposition.
Oh, interesting.
I think that's just, like, the way that those things kind of work. Like, it's always more objective from the people that have to grapple with the issues, as opposed to people that can just be vehemently, everything's terrible. but even in the same sense, like I know what Sean Hannity's going to say about Donald Trump. Like it's not interesting. Like he's just going to always have one position.
Yeah.
And then that ports down the stack to like I know what all these Twitter personalities are going to say like before anything happens, right? I know the talking points. But the people that are really interesting are the ones that are just telling the story. And those people like are going to be independent like outlets. Like they're going to be independent media personalities, or maybe not even media personalities so much as just people that have interesting angles that are non-pre-written, and they're just gonna like this is what you'd think of as blogging, right? It's like some dude that just wrote stuff on the internet because he was interested in it. He didn't work for media publication. Like those are the people that are gonna like become elevated as distribution gets more and more commoditized.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's interesting. So it's like the job title of English language news correspondent San Juan is gone, but the role. So at my work, we're always talking about the difference between titles and roles and try to define people by their roles. So it's like, okay, title of news correspondent San Juan, gone. Role of crazy dude observing the world around him and acting as a bridge or a node between different social strata of the United States and disseminating novel ideas persists. But it lives on in like podcasts like this one or in some interesting dude's Twitter feed like this one at S Matthew English or just
always be coding or whatever. But yeah, like just that idea of like figuring out how to like just go to Puerto Rico, live there for a couple months, and then talk about it and like talk to people and channel that accurately. Because like there's so many narratives, right? Like this hurricane thing, like everyone has an opinion about whether or not it's good. And like this Naomi Klein book is like she just has talking points du jour, right? And she's spitting them out like as a canon.
Yeah,
and, like,
she does do that.
They're so obviously wrong. Like I know this because she was talking about Bitcoin a lot because there's, like I said, there's this, or I guess they had this conference in Puerto Rico, which is so funny, called Porto Crypto, which is just all these like dickbag like crypto millionaires like talking about like Puerto Rico as a baller tax haven, which is like no tact whatsoever for like, hey, you guys like want to like just be slightly more chill and less extravagant about it, like, and she's just like talking about like how Bitcoin is horrible for the planet because the mining uses so much energy. And it's just like, I know these are like retarded talking points if you know anything about cryptocurrencies, but it's like, she's just so like lazy in like not even trying to understand it. She's just like, oh, this is bad. Like I'm putting this in my bad bucket and like going down, going down.
Yeah, you're right. You're totally right. Because like also, so I was telling my friend about like our idea for this podcast to talk about this Naomi Klein book.
Yeah.
And she was saying the idea of disaster capitalism is something that actually appeared first in another Naomi Klein book, where she was talking about like totally unrelated things. So Naomi Klein is just like cruising for like disaster capitalists to like identify. But
I thought she said this really interesting thing that I think you picked up on before me, telling me about. We're in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, you can actually explain it because I thought it was an interesting point.
It's so interesting. Okay, so Naomi Klein, like, while I totally scoff at her disaster capitalist identification like crusade, I am actually like enamored of her ability to like recognize interesting developments and like draw parallels between different events in Puerto Rico now after the, you could say, disaster, or New Orleans, like the hurricanes there, maybe hurricane capitalists. And so like apparently in the like, I don't know New Orleans terminology, I've never actually been there, although I'm planning to go this year.
Yeah, it's awesome. I want to decide that New Orleans is amazing.
Yeah. Footnote, I'm going to go to Mardi Gras this year, so stay tuned for the podcast about this. But okay, so apparently after the hurricane, the like wards or whatever, maybe not the right term, was like totally destroyed by like these levees breaking and being flooded. And so the people that were living there before were renters, and it's really difficult to dislodge renters who are in arrears on their rent or are just not great tenants. So there's like, just as you can imagine, a lot of like procedure and drama and like legal rigmarole that goes to accompany this. And so like they relocated them to like far off places such as like Oklahoma City or like whatever, like Tallahassee, whatever. I don't know, maybe Tallahassee's close. I was trying to say a faraway place. And so while they were gone, they destroyed those houses that they had been renting because they were so water damaged anyway. And in their place, they built like bougie condos. And then when they came back, they were like, okay, you used to live there, but now it's a bougie condo, so like you don't live there anymore. And they really like re-engineered the demographics of the city in this way. And so the governor of Puerto Rico at this time is kind of doing a similar thing, where there was like, so a lot of people renting like in arrears, blah, blah, blah. And so the hurricane came and destroyed their houses. And then he like helped them to relocate to Florida, like, which was a reasonable thing to do. So while they're gone, the owner of the property, so the guy owns the property that the people were just renting, he doesn't want to reconstruct this building because it's totally messed up. And there's somebody who comes there and says, yeah, so I'll buy it from you. And then I build some bougie hotel or whatever. And then like those people come back, but like they don't have a place to, like, they can't get the same deal that they got before because like it's a new world and a new paradigm. So like maybe it will have some kind of demographic change on Puerto Rico.
And
but
I guess that's the idea of disaster capitalism, is the people
exactly.
that come in after disasters and see that opportunity. Yo, it's also kind of interesting. Oh man, I lost my train of thought. But I was going to say this idea. Okay, so like there's this big idea of whether or not Puerto Rico should become a state. That's kind of interesting. That kind of plays into this because Puerto Rico, I guess, they if they're a U.S. state, they can't do this tax haven stuff where like you can skirt the federal capital gains tax, which would discourage a lot of the investment and interesting things about it right now. But the benefit, I guess, would be one that for at least the Democrats, you'd probably get 2 Democratic senators, which would be a really big deal. And the other benefit would be that people in Puerto Rico would, I guess, get federal benefits that they don't get right now. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but this is like kind of the big debate or whatever. But it's also kind of interesting, I think, that like I've known. Do you read Steve Saylor at all? He's a really interesting political commentator that you'd call like he's hard to classify because he kind of is very original. Like he's come up with like his own political theories and whatever. But I mean he's very right wing. I would assume it would be what most people would interpret it as. But he thinks that there's like an intentional effort to get Puerto Ricans to move to Florida to flip Florida blue because it's like such a battleground state that like changes it's like literally 50-50. So if you can get people from Puerto Rico to go to Florida and like vote Democrat, like it's a big move for the Democrats. So like they're actually encouraging this. Like the Democratic Party is like very like involved in like trying to get them into Florida.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. What else? So I'm trying to think of other things in Puerto Rico to say that we experienced.
I think one interesting thing is that basically the area where I live in Williamsburg is like such a huge magnet for the Puerto Rican diaspora. There's like little monuments to Puerto Rico all over the place. And there's even a street called the Avenue of Puerto Rico. It's like one of the sub-names of a street, which Zach used to live on. So like our friend who moved there, I was asking him about his decision to move to Puerto Rico. And he was telling me, man, I already sort of live in Puerto Rico. I live on the Avenue of Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I actually think this is kind of funny, right? Because all the people that moved to Puerto Rico, right? Crypto, so like they are skirting a 15% capital gains tax plus like corporate tax stuff if you're going to start a business there. But let's call it 15%. But like the price of cryptocurrency has declined by more than 15% since like you had to have moved out there. So like if anybody would have just sold at the top of, like the latest bull run and just paid the capital gains tax, you'd make out better than if you moved to Puerto Rico, held and skirted the capital gains tax, which I also think is really funny, which we pointed out. And our friend was like, yeah, you just can't look back. You gotta look forward. What else is there? I thought it was really interesting. Oh man. Oh, okay. So one thing I thought was interesting was just how awesome Puerto Rico would have been for fighting off invaders. Like I remember we were looking at, so like we're by like Las Perlas, I think was what it was called. It's like this slum on the beach. It's a beachside slum, right? I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently that's a thing. It's like a dope area, but like just slum. And dude, Hunter S Thompson had a line.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he called it like a slum so bad, like when they write maps of Puerto Rico, they just like have it blank. Yeah. It's so funny. But
I was saying like the crazy like drug addict in their newspaper office was like going there all the time and hanging out there.
Yeah.
Also the Despacito video was filmed
there. Despacito video is filmed there. Yeah. And it's an interesting area, but like when you look out like from there, because I guess that's on the North Shore where people would have been coming in from the U.S. Like, it just seems like this dope place to fight off like pirates or invaders. Because
totally.
You have like these like towers where like you could have cannons and things, and like it's like angled down like a fort on the beach. Oh, it was really cool. Crazy
intricate fortifications all over Old San Juan for fighting off pirates.
Yeah, all those forts are still there, which is
Which is another interesting thing is we met this dude who was in the Coast Guard, and so he was telling us about all the crazy misadventures that he was having, picking up dead scuba divers who got the bends and just like their blood boiled over while they were coming to the surface, or like people in crappy prop planes that just crashed into the sea and died.
Yeah, or were they running drugs? I didn't know, because he was telling us like all these planes crashed in.
Yeah.
It's like, are they running drugs in the planes? Or are they just like out for fun? Like,
that's my hypothesis, that there must be a lot of drug runners in Puerto Rico, but I don't know that.
There probably has to be, right?
Yeah. Maybe I've just watched too many gangster movies in my
The other
life.
interesting thing, okay, so like the economy of Puerto Rico was kind of interesting. So like it seemed like one of those cities, right? There's a couple of them. Like I had the same experience when I was in like Charleston, South Carolina, where I had a really good friend that went to school there, so I hung out there a couple times. But like the entire economy is just like food and beverage. It's like that's the ecosystem, and I guess then Puerto Rico has like one other thing, which is like the state government is really big.
Oh yeah.
So it's like everyone either works in food and beverage or like for the state government in some capacity, which I think is just interesting. There doesn't seem to be like a lot of like straight up private, or maybe tourism's probably pretty big, but like,
Or Goya? Is Goya from there?
I don't know.
I thought someone told me that, but I have
Bacardi
no idea.
rum, maybe.
Oh yeah, Bacardi.
Oh yeah, Bacardi. Yeah, because that's in the Rum Diary. Is like this dude steals like stuff from the Bacardi factory that's like higher proof rum than it's like legally sellable or something. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say about Puerto Rico before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I don't know. I really like the rainforest there, El Yunque.
Oh yeah, we went to El Yunque. We did a hike by a waterfall that was really cool.
Yeah.
Hiking in Puerto Rico is amazing, and it's also, oh my god, people are crazy there. Like, okay, you could die like 20 different ways in Puerto Rico with just like without anyone, like any care in the world, right? Like these hikes are not the same as like hikes in the US. It's like everything is dangerous, and you've got like animals everywhere, like crawling through stuff, and just driving there. Driving in Puerto Rico is insane. One of our friends said a turn signal is a signal of weakness in Puerto Rico, which is kind of like, and like police officers don't police the roads at all. They have like other stuff that they're worried about. So it's just like mayhem on the roads.
Yeah. Or so something else interesting, which Naomi Klein also mentioned, but then our friend's friend, who's a local, said again, which was that birth control was first experimented with in Puerto Rico on people who had no idea that they were being the subjects of these tests. Just so interesting.
Yeah, the history of Puerto Rico is like the U.S. used it as like this testing ground for experimental drugs. They said, so there's this island on the east coast of Puerto Rico called Vieques.
Yeah.
I don't know how you say it. Vieques.
Something like that.
Yeah, but this is where they did all the tests for like Agent Orange and napalm before, like for the Vietnam War. They just like carved out this island and they put 2 massive military bases on it, and they just tested all this stuff because they're like, oh, whatever, it's Puerto Rico. Like that's where you beta test stuff before you bring it to the U.S.
But this stuff still goes on. So one of my friends was doing this thing where he was living in Africa, and they beta test drugs there all the time still today. So it's like they'll just go into some village and they'll do like these placebo, like blind blah, 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 blah experiments on just like experimental pharmaceutical drugs. Oh, and Peter Thiel also mentioned this, that Donald Trump, one of the things he did was he lifted a ban on like, if there's something like if you're like have some incurable disease, then you're now allowed to experiment with like drugs that aren't approved by the FDA, which is dope because it's like, it's just, that's interesting science.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was trying to think. I think I need to look more into that birth control experiments. They seem so interesting.
Oh yeah.
Like we just put it in the water or something, just test it on a whole island. Jesus, man. Yeah, it's cool. I think though that San Juan and just Puerto Rico in general definitely has a lot of ways to go. Like it has a lot of potential, just because that flight is just so easy from New York.
Yep.
It's like you could probably fly to San Juan faster than you could drive to the Hamptons, like, or at least out to Montauk, at least out to Montauk. And it's really, just an awesome beach city with like a cool kind of vibe there. Feels very vacationy. And
there was also one other leitmotif of the book Rum Diaries, which I found fascinating, which was of like getting older as like a dude, like from your like early 20s to your like early 30s, because like the guy who's the narrator is like 32 or something like this, and then he's like super jealous of this guy who's like 24 or whatever and has this really hot girlfriend, is just like YOLOing all over the place, and then he's like reflecting on his like youth or something like that. And so I was just into that because like I also am like about to turn 30, and it's like a kind of just a theme of this book that I found really interesting. And so I read this book when I was in college, and I remember liking it, but I didn't reflect on this part at all. I didn't even remember that this was one of the major like driving motives of the plot. So I thought that was cool, and there was something that I really wanted to tweet, but I didn't because I thought it was too scandalous, which was that a man can only live by his balls and his wits for so long, which I thought was fascinating, right? Because like I feel like in my early 20s, I was totally like living by my balls and my wits, by like going out to China, and I was just like, whatever, YOLO, I'm in China, I don't give a shit, and it's like I just do whatever I want and like move to different places and whatever. But now I'm like, so the guy in the end of the book, he's like trying to buy like a house and buy a car and like have a job. And so like I'm doing those things too. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting that like maybe this is more common of a phenomena to like feel this way than just me personally.
Yeah. That's always kind of interesting, and it happens a lot, at least to me, when you realize that something you thought was unique to you is actually like quite a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
It's cool. All right. And I think just because the timing, we're going to have to run soon. But I think next week we wanted to do the Sapiens trilogy, which is going to be so interesting.
For sure.
So there's like a trilogy of books. The first one's called Sapiens. I don't even remember what the second and third are called because the third one just came out.
Homo Deus.
Yeah, it literally just came out. I haven't read them yet, but it's going to be they're really fascinating books, and that one should be a doozy. But anyway,
for sure.
Matt, enjoy your time in San Juan as you're still there, clearly.
Yes. If you're watching the video, you can see clearly that I am currently located in San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Yeah, there's no way you could have those buildings behind you.
It's physically impossible. How could those buildings be behind me if I wasn't in San Juan?
All right, cool. See you next week. Sapiens trilogy.
Good night and
Let's
good luck.